Welcome in everyone to the pack. Eli Berkovitz here with our special guest this week, Paul Bretl, of course, from the Packers Wire. Everyone who's on Packers Twitter knows exactly who Paul is, and we appreciate him taking some time here to join us. So, everyone, obviously, a lot to get to today. But before we do that, Paul, how you doing? How's your week been? I'm sure a lot busier than a lot of other people's in Green Bay.
Yeah, I'm doing excellent, Eli. I appreciate you having me on. And yeah, I mean, all the stuff that happened on this Wednesday has kind of came out of nowhere. Didn't expect it all today, but here we are.
Yeah, it was an eventful day, and I guess we might as well just get straight into the big news of the day. Of course, Joe Barry no longer the Packers defensive coordinator, something that fans have been waiting for, you can say, for since before the season even began, especially during the season. So, Paul, I guess, what was your initial response? And did you, being in Green Bay, did you have any sense that this was coming?
My guess was that this was coming. I mean, I didn't have any sort of, like inside information or anything like that. But to me, and I wrote about this at Packers Wire, the writing was on the wall, and there was kind of two things in particular that illustrated that. One was, I think it was after the Tampa Bay or the Carolina game where Matt LaFleur said that he needed to be more involved on the defensive side of the ball. And during really the Minnesota game on, it wasn't just that the defense started to perform better, turn things around. It was that they were doing things differently in a number of respects. Like their alignment along the defensive front. We saw Carl Brooks out towards, lined up at edge rusher. We saw Lucas Van Ness with his hand in the dirt. We saw blitzes from different places, from depth. Keyshawn Nixon, Eric Wilson and Quay Walker in the Minnesota game, both blitzing at the same time. The communication overall was much more sound, much more efficient from this group. And so there's little things like that on top of just the turnaround and performance that, we'll never know the answer to how much Matt LaFleur was actually involved on the defensive side of the ball. All we know is that he said he was going to have to be involved more. And then we saw these changes, and the Dallas game too, like the different coverage disguises that they utilized in that game. Yeah. So there's all these little things. And when you're the head coach, like if things are going sideways, like it was for that 3-game stretch against the Giants, Bucks, and Panthers, like you got to step in. Like that's part of the role. If you're the boss, you're the CEO, you got to step in and try to right the ship. And he did that. But in terms of long-term viability, you just can't expect your head coach, who's also the offensive play caller, to be able to sustain that over the course of the season. And if you're the head coach and you have to step in that situation, it means there's not trust. And if there's not trust, you don't really have anything. So that was the first big clue. And then Monday's press conference is the final one of the season with Matt LaFleur, and just kind of the tone of it. He had the opportunity. There was kind of an open-ended question, what contributed to the turnaround of the defense? Was it scheme? Was it the defenders? Like there was an opportunity there to give Joe Barry a little bit of credit. And he just said it was all the above and kind of kept it at that. And along the way through different questions, was heaping praise on Tom Clements, deservedly so, Adam Stenavich as well. There was just this, I'm going to use avoidance for lack of a better term, around Joe Barry. So those aspects coupled together, for me, kind of signaled that it was going to happen. It was just a matter of when. And admittedly, it was a little quicker than I expected, because if we look back at the 2 special teams coordinators that Matt LaFleur has moved on from, that took about a week after the season ended before a decision was made. We're 3 days in now, I suppose, before moving on from Joe Barry. And just one other interesting thing from that final press conference, because obviously after the Tampa Bay game, the Carolina game, everyone's wondering, at that point they're on the cusp of being in the playoffs or being in the playoff race. They fall to 6-8. It's like, why wouldn't you move on from him at this time? And trying to read between the lines, the tea leaves, Matt LaFleur said something on Monday during one of the final questions when he was asked about kind of holding this team together throughout the course of the season. And one of the things he said was, how can I expect them to stick together when we as the coaches, the coaching staff, doesn't stick together? And so I do wonder if he felt that moving on from Joe Barry at that time, weeks 15, 16-ish, would have, instead of, rallying the guys and kind of galvanizing things, would have had the opposite effect. I wonder if that was on his mind, because that statement there, if we as the coaches can't stick together, how can the players? If that was on his mind and in moving on from Barry at that time would have sent the Packers in the opposite direction rather than, going on the winning streak that they did. So again, just me reading between the lines, but I thought that was a really interesting point.
Yeah, I really like that you brought that up because I don't know if I necessarily connected it myself, but obviously him saying that, it's true. I mean, let's think about the turnaround they kind of had. I think you go 2-3 weeks before the end of the season, and look, I'm sure on Twitter, I don't remember exactly, but I'm sure I was calling for that to happen. But when you look at it from a more rational point of view, you're 6-8 and you fire defensive coordinator, your team's saying, okay, the season's over. Like we just fired our coordinator. This is done. We'll just basically let it go. I don't think we see the kind of turnaround we did if they went ahead and fired him. And while, yes, you do have to give credit to Barry for, the last, I guess you could say 4 games. I mean, the problem is that when you compare it to the 3 games you mentioned, Tampa, New York, and Carolina, of course they're going to look good. I mean, anything would look good compared to those games. But when you really dive in and you say Justin Fields and the Bears, Nick Mullins and Jaron Hall of the Vikings, not very good teams, not very good offenses. And then Dallas, yeah, very impressive first half. But at the end of the day, even you could say garbage time, whatever you want, the Cowboys were kicking onside kicks down by 2 possessions at the end of that game. Somehow, magically, they put up multiple touchdowns in a matter of minutes. And then the Niners, again, they did look pretty good. But I feel like the main consistent theme of Joe Barry's defense is when you really need it and you really need to make that stop, that's when not only do they not make the stop, it almost feels like they couldn't make it easier for the offenses. Mm-hmm. They play, how laid back everything is. So it really was time. And, it's unfortunate because I've said it on Twitter and it's true, even though, yes, I'm happy for the Packers. I think this is the right move. But it is unfortunate for Barry. But I do want to ask before we move on, what have you taken from these reports that Joe Barry could remain on the Packers staff? I feel like that would be a bit odd personally, but I don't know. What have you heard about that? Maybe something more than we have.
Yeah, I have, other than the reports that are out there, I don't have any additional info, but I'm in the same side with you in terms of that would be odd. And, the players really, really like Joe Barry from what we've, gathered and understood of the situation. And so you can see I guess if that's one of the big reasons, and we all know the importance or how much Matt LaFleur values the continuity aspect of it to, what potentially he could bring in that regard and the relationships that he has with the players. But I think, that's such I can't think of any other scenario around the league where that's a thing, and maybe it has been elsewhere, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. And I guess if you go down the path, which you wouldn't want to happen, obviously, is whoever the new defensive coordinator is, because if Barry does have some of those strong relationships, you just wouldn't want there to be, and I don't know that would happen by me. You just don't want there to be some sort of divide. You know what I mean? Where it's like Barry's side and then the new defensive coordinator side. And again, not implying that would happen. I don't know that would happen, but that's just, you could see that, maybe being one of the trickle down effects of all this. So I'm curious to see how that plays out, but yeah, I'm with you. That would be an odd move to make in my book.
Yeah. I just feel like you can't really move on.
That's a good way to put it.
It's still there. It's like someone tweeted it, but it's true. It's like getting divorced and saying, hey, but you can still live here with my new girlfriend. Mm-hmm. Like it doesn't really make a lot of sense. So Barry, again, I think he will be employed, whether it's the Packers or someone else. I am sure he will have a job, and I wish him the best, but this was the right move for the Packers. It was definitely time. So now let's get to, some more exciting parts of this, which is who could the new defensive coordinator be? I think this is as big of a coordinator hire as the Packers have had in a long time. And for a lot of teams, I mean, we went through a few with Rodgers, and unfortunately, each one was kind of similar to the last and not really what they were looking for. And you just don't want this to now be a theme for Jordan Love's career as well. And right now, you thought maybe next year would be the start of this was building year, next year, do a little better. And then maybe in 2 years, you can think about a window. But let's be real. The window is open. That is it. I mean, for a lot of Packer fans, myself included, pretty upset, thought they should have won Saturday. And if they won Saturday, I think all bets are off. This team could have beat anyone at that point. But of course, that's not what happened. But going forward, it's Super Bowl or bust once again for the Packers, essentially. So this is a big hire. Do you have any preferences yourself? And is there anyone that you have maybe heard is picking up some traction for the job?
Yeah, so 100% with you that this hire is so massive. The window, the Super Bowl window, appears to be not only cracked but on its way open heading into 2024, and the Packers have to maximize that opportunity. And previous hires that Matt LaFleur's had, a lot of them haven't worked out from a coordinator perspective. He inherited Mike Pettin, but this is going to be his third defensive coordinator, second hire. Rich Bisaccia was his third special teams hire since becoming head coach, and he's heading into, I think it's year 6 now.
Yeah,
So 6 coordinators just on between those two, special teams and the defensive side of the ball. And again, when it comes to maximizing the opportunity ahead, the maximizing the window, you got to get this hire right. And there's so many names being, thrown out there right now for this Packers team, and some of the qualities that I wouldn't mind them looking for in a defensive coordinator. At the end of the day, just go get the best guy possible, obviously, but someone who's willing to adjust. Matt LaFleur, I think it was after the Lions game, the first one, mentioned that the defense was just too rigid. And you saw that throughout Joe Burry's tenure, where it almost felt like sometimes, regardless of the situation, regardless of the quarterback, the team that you're going up against, like whether it's Tommy DeVito or whether it's Patrick Mahomes, it felt like you're going to get the same exact defense.
yeah,
And so someone who's not just willing to adjust week to week, but within the game, like if you come out in the first quarter and the opposing offense goes down and scores on you quickly, moves the ball, that's a sign that your game plan wasn't very good. If we get into the second half and out of halftime late in the game, the defense is able to put up points in those key situations, that shows there's a lack of adjustments, or at least effective adjustments. And
yeah,
so, I mean, just this season, the Niners game, obviously, the Giants game earlier, like there's a couple of examples to point to. And so, a defensive coordinator who's very, very willing to make those adjustments on the fly, isn't so rigid to, all right, this is a system, and just puts the players in it rather than trying to mold what they want to do defensively to fit the skill set of the players that they have on the field. So that's one of the big things for me. I think, and this part isn't a be all end all by any means, but Matt LaFleur wanted this type of defense that Joe Barry ran. Basically said, I want this type of defense, and went and found Joe Barry to run it. I never think it's a bad idea, in a sports organization, to have a variety of thoughts,
yeah,
philosophies, coaching backgrounds, because I think that's where real growth can come from, when not everyone is siloed in the same thought process. You know what I mean?
yeah, for sure.
And you have different experiences, different ways to attack things. And when you have those different elements working together, I think that's where a lot of growth can happen, a lot of innovation can happen. So breaking away from that Vic Fangio style defense, and also too, like, look around the NFL, like what are the top defenses doing? They're really, really disruptive at the line of scrimmage. They're causing chaos near the line of scrimmage, leading to confusion for the quarterback. Like that's kind of where the pendulum has swung from a defensive perspective in that regard. So those are kind of two things from a quality standpoint that pop out to me. As far as some names, I just have a gut feeling on this, but I feel like, again, the pendulum might swing in the opposite direction a little bit, where instead of getting an established name like Joe Barry, who had been in the league for 20 plus years, I feel like, because at that time too, Matt LaFleur did interview but missed out on hiring Ejiro Evero, kind of an up and comer at that time. So I feel like the pendulum might swing back in that direction a little bit. And a couple names that jump out to me are Chris Hewitt and Anthony Weaver. Chris Hewitt's the passing game coordinator with the Baltimore Ravens. Anthony Weaver's the assistant coach, interior defensive line coach for the Ravens as well. And we all know the Ravens defensive front, just how stout that is over the years. But what I really like about those two is the organization they're coming from. I mean, the Ravens are one of the best run organizations, out there. And so when you can have an individual from that strong of a culture, who's had success as a team, as an organization, I just think innately that brings a ton of value, and almost raises the floor of what that hire is, because of their background, because of who they worked under, who they worked with, and their previous experience. Another name is Marquand Manuel, safeties coach for the New York Jets. There's I believe he has some past defensive coordinator experience with the Atlanta Falcons. I think in 2017, they were actually a top 10 defense or close to it. 2018, not so much. But also there's just that connection as well. New York Jets safety coach Robert Saleh. We know Matt LaFleur's connection with Robert Saleh. So those are just a few, uh, you know, younger names, so to speak, or, not guys who have been long tenured, established defensive coordinators throughout the past. Because like I said, it's just a gut feeling, but I feel like that's the direction Matt LaFleur is going to go. And he as a head coach right now he's in a much different place than where he was 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Still kind of early on in his tenure. It's a more veteran team at that point. So maybe having that more experience, more veteran voice in there. But after these last 2 seasons, I mean, just everything the Packers had to navigate last year, the ups and downs that came with it, being on, in the win and in situation, not being able to make it, trading away Aaron Rodgers, obviously all the ups and downs that came through this season. Like, there's been several standout moments over these last 2 years where the leadership, the culture that Matt LaFleur has helped establish has been on display. Like going back to 2022, and obviously it helps when you have, the super competitive Aaron Rodgers as your quarterback, a more veteran team. But that Cowboys game in week 10 of last year, there's a 4-game losing streak. They're down 14 points in the fourth quarter. Like they could have packed it in at that point.
Yeah.
They didn't. They came back and won. Even a few weeks later, they're 4-8. They're down 2 scores to the Bears on the road in the fourth quarter. Again, your playoff hopes are just barely hanging on. You come back and you win. Like, those are examples of the leadership, the culture that is within this Packers team right now. And then obviously numerous examples this season, the growth of the offense, being 2-5, being 3-6, even being 6-8 and being able to fight back. So I say all that to say Matt LaFleur is not at a point where, if he's a first year, second year head coach, where kind of like where they kept Pettin to a degree because he had that experience, was a previous head coach, where it's like, well, he can be a voice for, someone to work with behind the scenes for this new head coach. Like, that's not a thing for Matt LaFleur anymore.
Yeah.
Like, he's proven that he can get the job done. He's a proven leader of that team. So if he decides to go, on a more younger, more inexperienced from a defensive coordinator perspective route, I think that fits. And also too, like, it fits this team. Like, this is a young team, the youngest team in the NFL, obviously. So like I said, for those reasons, those coordinator potentials that I mentioned, that's the reason I think they might go that direction. And those 3 names that I mentioned, Hewitt, Manuel, and Weaver, like, they've all been requested for defensive coordinator interviews by other teams around the NFL. So they're on other teams' radars as well. Last thing I'll say, this Packers team, like Matt LaFleur, like we said, has to get this hire right, but they should have their pick of just about anyone. Like, this is a coveted job. If you're a defensive coordinator, you see the talent, like, this window is just starting to open. You can come here and be the one to potentially turn it around and be a big part of, making hopefully what becomes a Super Bowl run. Like, this is a terrific opportunity out there. So they should have their pick of really, won't say everyone because we never know, but just about everyone who is fighting for a defensive coordinator job.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like you said, you're the guy that comes in and after 15 years of subpar defenses for Rodgers and now Love, and you give them a top 10 defense and have a run, like, that is basically how you can almost guarantee you're going to get a head coaching job in the NFL. If you could be the guy to give the Packers a good defense. And I love the names you brought up, specifically Weaver. Like you said, I mean, being in Baltimore, like, maybe it's an oversimplification, but I don't care. Like, if you're a part of that defense and what they're doing right now, and also just what the Ravens always do, but especially this year, I mean, I think they're number 1 in turnover, sacks, and points. I don't think it's ever been done before, or at least not in a very long time. Like, give me that guy. Give me someone who's going to come and try to put the Ravens defense, run the Ravens defense in Green Bay. I would watch that with just extreme happiness, like, no questions asked.
I think too, I was talking about kind of traits that we want, a mentality shift. Because it's not just like Joe Barry, but it was, that Mike Pettin defense. It was the Dom Capers defense too. Like, this bend but don't break, passive to a degree style. Like, that's been a part of this Packers team, like, not just Joe Barry and beyond. And when you think about, what you want from your defense, I'm going to use the word aggressive, but that doesn't mean blitzing every single play, but it just means the mentality. And like I said, causing chaos around the line of scrimmage, like just kind of switching things up from what's become the norm here in Green Bay. And when, it's tough to have kind of take on that mentality when the core of your scheme and what you're asking your players to do is just kind of drop back, keep everything in front of you. Like there isn't that attack mentality that comes with that. You got to rally to the ball. That's a big part of it to limit explosive plays, but there still isn't that attack element's been missing.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, when whether it's myself or anyone else on Packers Twitter, will go and tweet something about needing a more aggressive defense. And you have people saying, "Oh, but you can't blitz every day." It's not, like you said, it's not all about blitzing. You can go, number one, just your secondary, having your corners playing up on the receivers, forcing them to actually run a route and get open, as opposed to, hey, if you want to just stop at a 5-yard hitch route every play, you could do that on the Packers and go 5 yards down the field the whole game, and you will just do it unmatched. You're not even going to be tried to be stopped, which is insane. And then also at the line, you don't need a blitz. You don't need to bring in 5 guys every time. But like you said, create chaos at the line. Let there be 6 guys lined up at the line, and 2 will drop back. And one time will be the linebackers, and one time Kenny Clark will drop back, and you'll bring a blitz to one of the linebackers. Like, there are ways to be so much more creative, as opposed to every time I feel like the Packers defense comes out, the guys are lined up really far back. There's no activity at the line of scrimmage. You either have 3 down linemen or 4, whatever it is. And it's like, okay, well, I see the defense. I read the defense. Nothing's going to shock me post-snap with what this defense is doing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, like you said, 100%, got to be more aggressive and just really force the offense to beat you, as opposed to hoping that, like, you make one play at the most key moment. And if you don't make that one play, you're going to lose. Like, that's just not the way to do it. But we will see. I'm sure it will be a very talked about search. We'll see how long. I mean, I don't know. To be honest, like, I'm having a hard time remembering when they hired Barry. How long usually do teams take with these hirings? Like a week or 2?
I don't recall how long it took to get to Barry, but what I will say is that the decision to move on from him, the decision to move on from strength and conditioning coach Chris Gizzi, the decision to bring in a different kicker, like you can kind of point to those 3 things: defense, kicker, and there was that report from Tom Silverstein that they're going to use like UW-Madison, I think, to do some additional tests on Eric Stokes, Christian Watson for the hamstring. Like those were 3 big things for this Packers team. And just a few days after the season ended, they made moves in those 3 big areas. So, it seems like they're moving fast in terms of what they want to do, what they need to do, that they feel. And it shows you the urgency that they feel as an organization of, hey, this window's here. Let's do everything we can to maximize it. Because even if it's an incremental improvement, like whoever they bring in as defensive coordinator, what if that coordinator is 5% better? What is 5% with the game plan, with the teaching of that game plan to help with the execution, compounded over the course of a season? Like, how much does that add up? Because look at that 49ers game. Like, there's like 10 different plays that individually could have given the Packers the win. One more red zone touchdown, coming away with one of those interception opportunities. Jordan Love, connecting with Aaron Jones on that check down on 3rd down, the drive extends. Like, there's so many small plays. The margin for error in January is so small. So even if it's an incremental improvement, not to be, over the top, but that actually could be the difference between a win and a loss this time of the year.
Absolutely. I mean, the Packer fans know more than anyone just how close that margin of error can be come playoff time. It really is, like, because it's weird. Like, people want to always be like, oh, Packer fans are so spoiled. Quarterback, Favre, Love, Rodgers, they don't know what it's like to be. But you know what? To come with those quarterbacks, the most heartbreaking playoff losses year after year after year, say we're spoiled all you want, it takes a toll on any fan.
It adds up.
And having great quarterbacks only makes it harder, because it's like we should be winning these games. Like, we have the better quarterback, a lot of times the better team, and you just end up losing. And unfortunately, a lot of times it's defense and special teams related. So hopefully that's what gets figured out this offseason. And you mentioned it, bringing in a kicker, Jack Podlesny from Georgia. He did not play anywhere, I guess, this past year, unless I'm wrong, Paul. Unless maybe he played in some other league. But okay, he did not. But back at Georgia, he was, I wouldn't say, great. He wasn't terrible. Kicked, 82% for his career. Had 5 misses each of the last 2 seasons. So nothing great, nothing awful. I don't necessarily think this is the guy that it's like Carlson or him and no one else can be brought in. We're obviously super early. They could bring in a veteran at training camp. They could bring in an undrafted rookie at training camp. So, I mean, yeah, Jack Podlesny brought in competition for Anders Carlson. Paul, any specific thoughts on him?
I'm just going to guess that one of the things that they liked about him was his big game experience. He's a 2-time national champion at Georgia, playing in the SEC championship games. Because when the Packers took Anders Carlson, that was one of the, when Rich Bisaccia was talking to us shortly after the draft, like that was one of the things that stood out to the Packers about Carlson. There was kind of 2 things they mentioned. Bisaccia referred to it multiple times this season: his mental makeup, his ability to bounce back. And I mean, credit to Carlson for all the ups and downs. Like, you never missed 2 in a row. You never missed 2 in a game, I don't think. Like, he did always bounce back, but the problem in the playoffs is you don't always have that opportunity, as we saw.
Exactly.
But I'm going to guess a big part of Podlesny was the experience that he had in those big games. Again, won 2 national championships at Georgia, played in those games, SEC championships. And the Packers, I believe, did have him in for a workout in September. During the season, so a little bit of familiarity there, but yeah, they're it's just competition's needed. It absolutely was. And at this, rewinding to training camp when Anders Carlson was the only kicker in camp, and since they took him, all this Packers team has preached, Goody, LaFleur, Bisaccia have preached his patience.
Yeah.
And that approach works fine when it's August and you're transitioning like the Packers are, and there's really no expectations. Like, nobody even, Jordan Love has said, like, we kind of didn't know what to expect coming into this season. And so that process works. But again, you're going into this totally different season in 2024 expectations wise. Like, again, the margin for error is incredibly small. So any bit of competition is going to be impactful. Just one other kind of sidebar I want to mention. Matt LaFleur's final message to the team, I really liked, because obviously they established a really strong foundation this season. We've talked about the Super Bowl window potentially opening up in 2024, but his kind of final message to him was nothing's guaranteed. And I like that because it creates a sense of urgency, and it's doesn't take away from what they did this year, what they accomplish, but it's also hey, it doesn't mean we've arrived yet either.
Yeah.
And that nothing guaranteed, Packer fans know that. I imagine there's many out there after the 2010 Super Bowl thought they'll be back.
Yeah.
Not even to win one, but they'll be back in one at least, right? And obviously still waiting for that next appearance. So I like that message. Preston Smith was calling it a championship mindset. Josh Myers talked about just being very, very intentional in how you attack the offseason and what you prioritize and what you do. And Matt LaFleur said all these guys met with their position coaches before heading out of town, and they're given 1 to 2 things to work on. And the expectation is when you get back together in mid-April for OTAs, that those boxes are checked and they're not still working on them at that point. So now they can have something new to work on. And again, just build upon what they've established and get to where they want to be.
Yeah. And I love that message. I like that you brought it up. And yeah, this team, it's crazy to think that I could even be saying something like this, but the last thing you would want is a bunch of young guys going into the offseason thinking, oh, we're the shit. Like next year we're gonna walk in and we're just gonna be one of the best teams. Like, that's not how it works. Like, you gotta work, and you guys are still young. And I think, look, obviously it was a great year, especially great finish to the year, but Love and everyone else, young receivers, as great as some of they were, young tight ends, as great as some of them were, like, I think because the expectations were either low or just there weren't really any expectations, it made the good like great. And not to take away from anyone, but there's definitely still things to clean up for the whole team. And that includes Jordan Love, that includes, again, Jaden Reed, great season, still need to clean things up all over. So that is something that, this offseason, work, come back, training camp, work, OTAs, and then next year go and prove that you're legit, that it wasn't a 4-game stretch where you got hot at the right time. But again, they're showing clearly urgency, saying we're not going to like go into next year as another, obviously not rebuilding, but like, well, we'll see how the year goes. Like they know what they can achieve, and they're trying to go and do it, which is great. And you already mentioned it, but I just want to cover it real quick. The Packers let go Chris Gizzi, the strength and conditioning coach, which again, I saw someone tweeted and I forgot who, but it was the same sentiment I was thinking, which is, I don't know exactly what a strength and conditioning coach does, like on a day-to-day basis. But when you have a team that for years is just always hamstring injuries, groin, like other just soft tissue things that should not be as common as they are, you got to look somewhere. And you would think strength and conditioning is the place to look. And I just really hope they can get figured out. And attached to that is, of course, Christian Watson and Eric Stokes going over to UW Whitewater, trying to figure out their hamstring issues. So that is nice to hear, because when I was speaking to Christian Watson's father a couple of weeks ago, he told me they already had a plan in place for the offseason. I didn't get much more detail, but clearly this was it. Have you heard, any more detail about when they're going, what that process kind of is, or it's just, hoping to get some tests done or something?
Yeah, I don't have any insight in that. Just guessing they're searching for an answer. And like you said, I'm not going to pretend that I know the ins and outs of what Chris Gizzi's job was with the team, but just given the reoccurring injuries that both those guys have with the hamstring, the measurements they're taking right now, I'm guessing LaFleur felt that there is some connection, and to a degree, there's, that's out of Chris Gizzi's control, but
Yeah.
I'm thinking it's kind of more of a, I'm going to use the word philosophy for lack of a better term, and how you approach these type of things is what they're looking to change up more than anything.
Yeah. And it's, again, something that hopefully will matter, because it's really mattered for a while for the Packers, these kind of injuries. And it never seems to be the fourth string, guard. It's always your stars, your starters, the guys you need dealing with these things. Hopefully they got it figured out. But again, pretty eventful day in Green Bay, which just makes having Paul here all the better. Always knows what's going on. So, Paul, before we head out, I know you have some stuff cooking up for this offseason, some new things you're working on, and you always got great stuff. So let everyone know what you're working on now and for the offseason, and where they can find it all.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Eli. I can find all my work over at Packers Wire. Follow me on Twitter at Paul_Bretl. Right now, kind of the series I'm working on is a position-by-position review of the last season, but also looking ahead to the offseason in terms of what are moves that need to be made at those positions, what are some of the decisions that have to be made. So that's the big series, and then we're always sprinkling in some other articles as well.
Yeah, so everyone, Paul always does great work. Check it out. His series reviewing position by position. I know I'll be looking at it. It's fun right now being a Packer fan. You feel like you're kind of back in that 2008, 2009 area where it's like there's just so much ahead of us, and it really is exciting. So for fans, I know you're going to be looking for all the content you can. So find Paul on Twitter at Paul_Bretl, and you can find, of course, the show on Twitter at the Pack_show, as you see at the bottom of the screen. And you can find me on Twitter at BookofEli_NFL. And check out any of my writing over at PackReport.com. But until next week, everyone, really appreciate you tuning in. Paul, once again, thank you for coming through. And we will see you next time, everybody. Go Pack, go.